Council, an international affairs think tank, and was the director for the Arabian Peninsula for the White House. Gina, always good to speak to you. Let's start off by asking your thoughts on what you heard there. There's about a minute or so from President Trump's address in the White House answering questions. What's your takeaway?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Well, my first reaction was a little bit disturbed. The president talked about the Iranian ships being small pea shooters, I think was the word he used.
Yeah.
But
Little
they're
boats with pea shooters, I think was the phrase.
but they've proved highly effective. And there is a reason that ships are not going through the strait, even with the U.S. effort that the Secretary of Defense has laid out. We are in a state right now where diplomacy has got all the pressure on it because the current efforts, frankly, are likely to fail. The amount of resources that the United States would have to leave in the strait to get ships safely through and convince them to go through, which would really mean an escort, not simply saying, follow this path and you'll be okay. The Iranians have proved themselves willing and capable to attack ships. And so insurers, the crews themselves, are going to need more from the United States to actually try and get through there again. So in addition to the resources needed, and keep in mind, even now, there are 2 destroyers, hundreds of aircraft, manned aircraft, thousands of military personnel, 15,000, I believe, and helicopters, just to have what we have right now with no ships moving. So to escort them through would require a great deal more.
And Gina, we had a clip of Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth to play, but it was updated. We got President Trump in. But what Pete was saying was that earlier the ceasefire, he said it's still on, but the United Arab Emirates are saying that they're intercepting Iranian missiles. Just how fragile do you think this ceasefire is?
Well, it's always going to be fragile until we get into the conflict. But the secretary's statement was really an admission that the United States needs the ceasefire to continue. The choices otherwise are very poor indeed. The president has seen what the markets do when the conflict is hot. We know the strain on the world's economy, and more importantly for the president, the U.S. economy. The gas prices, of course, are extraordinary, and Americans are suffering. Elections are coming up. So he does not want to start that hot war, which means there's a great deal of latitude for the Iranians to strike various things, if not U.S. military vessels. And that's what we see happening in the UAE. If the hot war does start, the Iranians can do a great deal of damage.
Gina, I just want to read a few more comments that I'm just reading from the BBC News website. Trump is saying that the US is making, quote, tremendous deals with South Korea and Japan on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. He says that the US blockade is working well. Iran, quote, wants to make a deal. They play games, he says, but let me tell you, they want to make a deal. How much do you believe of that?
Not much. I mean, we've heard, we've won the war, right? I mean, we've heard that multiple times.
Yeah.
So the fact that then we're talking about deal making and ceasefires and the war is terminated, we heard that. So as we've looked at the Iranian statements and the statements from President Trump specifically, the Iranians have proved more reliable with regard to stating what in fact is happening. The president does use hyperbole. Sometimes it can be effective, but he has been disproved far too often during this conflict. And Americans are, I imagine the world, are listening with a deal of skepticism.
And Gina, I want to ask you this from a human level and from your experience. And you've been in the rooms where deals are being made, international deals and diplomacy. If you were a diplomat at this point in a room listening to this, what would your advice be? What would you be thinking?
Well, my counsel would be that yes, a deal is possible. There are myriad ways of putting the elements on paper and then working around them. I don't know that from the president's perspective, it's going to be better than what President Obama gut because that's his bottom line. But frankly, President Obama's deal is looking pretty darn good right now. And we know that the Iranians did not start enriching up to that 60% until after President Trump tore that deal up. So I would be pressing for a deal. Certainly, the Iranian demand that their right as a signatory to the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, that they be allowed to enrich is under international law correct. The right to enrich and acknowledging that does not mean de facto enrichment. And so there are ways of threading that needle with people who are informed about the region, about Iran, about the history of it all. And this is unlikely to be the president's friend, his son-in-law, or even the vice president. The vice president is to sign deals, not to negotiate them. He doesn't have the knowledge.
Gina, always fascinating speaking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis, as always. Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic. Gina, thank you so